So that's a quick brief about me, right? So I told you who I work for. I've done solutions with databases, BI, use different sort of BI tools, help deploy applications and stuff, and I also do APIs, right? And these days I've been helping customers integrate their applications, build better APIs and stuff. So the image on the right is my favorite toy, the shoes. So I've just enrolled into the longest race of my life. So I'm doing 50 kilometers in a month from now, like UTA 50. Like I've never done more than 33 kilometers, and 50 is like gonna be, make me really feel uncomfortable, more uncomfortable than talking to you guys. But yeah, I'm excited. Hopefully the next talk I'll tell you how did it go. So I thought, let's start with the theme of the event, right? It's all about enabling business networks, and guess what? It's 12 and I'm hungry. So what better example than McDonald's, right? So let's go back in the time 5 years ago, and I'm sure we all have been there, right? In McDonald's, right? Like 5 years ago, when you wanted to get a burger, you would just go talk to the person behind the counter. They would have a point of sale terminal. They would book your order, and it would show up on somebody's screen, and the order would show up. They would prepare it and give it to you, right? But fast forward to right now, right? Now what has happened is, similar to the theme of the keynote, right? It was, how do we enable businesses, right? So it's no longer the attendant behind the counter who's allowed to book orders for McDonald's. It's you, it's me, it's the DoorDashers who are allowed to book orders now, right? And API has played a critical role in that, right? So had not there been APIs, McDonald's wouldn't have been able to extend their ordering, right? So now you could order your burger on your phone even before you reach the McDonald's. You could go in and stop in front of those kiosks, right? Big screen kiosk. You can place your order there, or you could also do a DoorDash or an Uber Eats to place your order, and they can place order with McDonald's, collect it, and deliver it to you, right? So API is the glue, right? It's the glue that allows you to connect with your customers, citizens, or in my case, hungry people, partners like DoorDash, Minilog, and everyone else, right? So API is really key. So if you look at the summary of what API does, right? Basically, number one, it helps you automate your processes, right? So you typically have normal repetitive processes in your organization. They are a very good candidate for you to automate them, right? So think of it as ordering a burger is I can't get it out of my head. But yeah, onboarding a customer, right? You've got a couple of checks. If you are an enterprise who works with businesses, you've got certain processes, right? You want to check if the customer already exists, and if there's an entity already into the CRM. And once you know that the entity doesn't exist in the CRM, you want to go and check in your financial ERP to see if there's an account for that customer. If not, you want to provision both of them together, link it together. Pretty manual job, right? And of course, you can automate that with APIs. Now, once you do that, you want to take it to the next level, right? You want your partners to consume those APIs, right? So how do you expose these APIs? So in the last session, Peter walked us through the developer portal, and you saw how APIs could be discoverable. How can everyone else explore APIs? So that's the next level, right? And for businesses, it's also important to integrate with external APIs, right? So that's another key point, right? So if I'm DoorDash, I'm Menulog, I'm Uber Eats, I want to integrate with McDonald's. Yeah, here comes McDonald's again. McDonald's APIs, right? I want to place the order that comes to me. So that's another critical part of enabling business networks, right? And two, there's always changes, right? COVID has taught us that you always have to change your processes, right? So it's not about build once and forget about it. Your business will have to adapt. Now, if business adapts, your APIs adapt too, right? And that's another important thing. And of course, collaboration, right? Hey, I joined a new company, and if I'm trying to write an integration logic, create a new API, I don't want to go and build the base APIs again, right? I want to reuse those APIs. So the key question that I have for all of you guys today is, how long does it take to create an API from an idea to production? Okay? Just what do you guys think, right? There's no right answer, there's no wrong answer, but how long have you seen, right? Is it months? Definitely months. If you say hours, then probably my presentation is over.
Probably weeks.
Weeks? Yes, and then depending on the complexity, it could be 2 weeks, 5 weeks. So it's very good, right? So the whole idea is that because our businesses are so dependent on APIs, now you want to make this faster, right? And let me show you another favorite thing of mine. Okay, what about the API? Do you know what this image is? Who's gonna guess?
That was a movie, yeah?
Yes, which movie is that?
Inception?
Yes, Inception. So there was an API developer called Leonardo DiCaprio, and he was very good at creating abstractions, right? So think of, so the main theme of the movie was he has got devices that allow you to get inside people's dreams. And from one dream, you could get into another dream. And from another dream, you could get into another dream. And then he would lose a track that, hey, am I in reality or am I in somebody's dream, right? And then he had one of these devices, like a charm device, right? That was an abstraction. And that device existed only in the real world. Okay, so that was an abstraction. So secret of creating fast APIs is abstractions, right? Now think of it as, okay, I don't look like a junior developer, but what if I was a junior developer, right? Now, if I'm a junior developer and I have to create an API from idea to production, it's going to take me months, right? How can I enable somebody like myself to create an API into production? The secret lies in abstractions, right? So there are so many complicated processes in the whole API development lifecycle, right? What if I could extract it so that Puneet doesn't need to know about it, right? And today's session is all going to be about what are these abstractions, right? What can we hide from the developer so that he focuses mainly on what the business logic is, okay? So in an ideal world, I would want the developer to only write what is the business logic and nothing else, right? So I believe that, I personally believe, 80% of the stuff that a developer does is not the business logic. You know, it's something that is themes around it, right? And let's see what these themes around it are, right? So I don't call it as a reference architecture, right? Because there's plenty of reference architectures everywhere, right? And again, this, I'm very sure that a lot of you guys are doing something like this, right? So my objective is to show you what works, right? This is what has worked for a lot of my customers, and this is what has been working well, right? So I'll show you some of the key parts, right? And each of these have got roles to play in our development lifecycle, right? So here's me. I've got 2 gray hairs, so I don't write code anymore, but here's a developer, okay? And developer typically has got one favorite IDE, right? So it could be VI, it could be TextMate, or Visual Studio Code, right? And if you're asking to use something else, so think of it as, hey, I'm a full stack developer. You ask me to create a no-code based integration, I'm like, hey, are you making me redundant? Are you making me lose my skills? So I'm not saying that no-code is not a good way to go, right? So I'm just saying that, to me, I feel threatened when you say it's no-code, but that's okay, you know what? Let's move on. And then you always have a source code repository, right? A repository which enterprises maintain. You track your source code, you track your versions, you know who's making those changes. Robin comes and leaves some passwords in my code, and I know about it, and then security comes in and say, hey, what is this? How the hell do you write the API keys into the code, which is on the GitHub, right? You don't want to do that, right? And of course, then the magic of our, how many of us are DevOps people here? Any DevOps people? No? Good. So the magic that our DevOps team does, right? I don't want them to spend time on, hey, I updated this new patch, applied it, hey, can you please move it to production? No. You know, DevOps is a very important skill. They play a very important role. I just want them to spend time automating stuff, right? And that's where the magic of pipeline comes in, right? How do you check in the code in here? We take that code and perform some magic on it, and then we'll see what the magic is, by the way. And then put it onto your deployment platform, right? And then, hey, I'm a developer. Back in the days, I used to deploy code on the bare metal servers, right? Nobody knows what bare metal servers are, right? And then it was VMs, and then, hey, what is that container? And then Kubernetes, like, do I need to know all of them? And why should I worry about, when I'm automating my business logic, I'm creating new logic, why do I worry about the complexities of the environment, right? Do I really have to expert to write an integration service? Maybe not, right? And that's where the development platform comes in. And all of this gets even more complicated when you say, hey, I want a cloud native API, right? So do I worry about cloud native, or do I focus on my business logic, right? So that's a very classic example of what can you do it, what can we do as a team to help developer create abstractions, right? Developer does not need to know how complex Kubernetes is, what support is, right? Or even for that matter, when you talk about cloud native, you know, there are principles like has anyone heard about what 12 factors of cloud native app is? No? So it's all around principles, right? What a cloud native application should look like. And we'll not go into that, but think of it as one way is that I need to have logging, right? I don't need to bog down my developer by saying, hey, just figure out all the good things of logging, and then we put microservices, your one API is going to call another API, and then it's your responsibility to ensure that if one of these fails, you know which one fails, right? So you don't want the developer to be bogged down by that complexity, right? And our favorite topic, right? API management. We saw API management in the last session, right? So there's a lot of stuff about, hey, how do I manage the lifecycle of an API? Create an API, publish it on a portal, make it discoverable for everyone, right? Now that has got an impact other way as well, right? So I'm a developer, okay? If I write a new API, it might consume an existing API or use some other services, right? Now how do I make it more discoverable? You are telling me I should go to another developer portal and figure out your JSON and then import your Swagger and write my logic. Well, that's too much, right? Because of these tasks, I can't develop and make an API available in few hours, right? Instead of months or weeks. And then of course, that's the dependencies impacting API. And then the identity platform, right? And then, hey, how do I know who's accessing my API, right? How do I write the authentication logic? How do I write the authorization logic? The library is available, but every developer chooses their own way of doing stuff, right? I don't want to leave such critical decisions for those choices, right? So, of course, I can create abstractions from it. Using those abstractions, as Peter in the previous session said, you could have a single policy for your whole enterprise and then they stick to it, right? That's another level of abstraction, right? Let's dive deeper into each one of these. So deployment platform, right? So this exists today in multiple forms, right? Could be Kubernetes pods, could be containers, could be VMs, could be jar files or whatever that might be, right? Depending on the platform that you're using. And the platform also has got responsibilities around observability and insights. So think about logging, okay? Now, what should I log, what should I not log, and do I have to explicitly log? So depending on what kind of pattern of API calls that I'm using, so that's a category for abstractions, right? What if I could define the logging in the platforms so that my developer doesn't have to worry about it, right? Focus on the business logic, right? This is one term that I'm going to repeat probably 30 times more in the next few slides. Platform patching and secret management. If I'm deploying it on an operating system, how do I ensure the patches are up to date, right? I don't want my developer to worry about it. Of course, you've got the system administrators, you've got the DevOps engineers who worry about that, but I don't want to be worried about it. And then comes security best practices, right? Like my colleague Robin writes API keys. No, he doesn't write API keys in the source code, but I'm just taking his name. So, yeah, if I leave the identity information, my passwords or API keys in the code, that's not a best practice, and that eventually somebody hacks in and they get the keys, right? So how do I ensure that Puneet, as a developer, doesn't have to worry about it, right? So it's all about giving him an abstraction so that he can manage those secrets in the right way, right? So that's another candidate for abstractions. And then finally, scalability and resource management. So it's not always about, hey, how do I scale? How do I scale? It's always about scaling down as well, right? If I create an API that nobody's going to use, I don't want it running on like 4 or 5 containers, 4 or 5 pods, right? How do I ensure that it scales down? Now, me as a developer, do I have to worry about it? How can I not worry about it and just focus on the business core? That's another level of abstraction that we can automate, which can support the developer with. Then comes the magic of the deployment pipelines, right? What they do is, think of it as, I've got all of my code into my repository, my source code repository, GitHub or source tree or whatever you might call it. And then comes the things that pick the source code up, okay? The critical part of one of the 12 factors principle says you have to build and run it separately. So when you say build, which means I've got the source code, how do I create an executable, right? I've got a class in Java, how do I binary which is executable, right? A jar or whatever that might be. So they say that it has to be a separate process, right? And then sometimes there's a developer like me, and then there's a DevOps engineer like one of us here. And then if you tell me that, hey, I'm already checking my code, my job is done, okay? And then the DevOps engineer is caught up with several other things, and he takes a little time, and I'm like anxious, hey, what happened? Did my code fail, or did it work, or yeah, I just want to see it live, right? So we are two different personalities, right? DevOps engineers different, developers are different, right? How can we give the keys of DevOps in the hands of the developer, right? So that I can patch my code anytime I want. I can upgrade the code, I can downgrade the code. I just don't want it every time when the source code is checked in, right? So that's on the abstraction key. And surprises, right? I don't like surprises, right? Like if I have an issue with my code, I want to know during the development stage, right? I want to have parity between the development system and the test system, or the prod system. Sorry, when I meant was prod and development parity. So yeah. Now me as a developer, I don't need to worry about it, right? So if you ensure that the development instance and the production instance is exactly same, if a code has to break, it will break in development. And that's where I realized I know how to fix that. So if it's not a production problem, it's a development problem, right? So that's another thing. And of course, security and testing management comes in because pipelines are also technically meant to perform those tests as well, right? So as a developer, I need to package my test cases along with the pipeline so the pipeline can run them before it deploys on a next instance, right? So that's pipeline magic. Then my favorite topic, right? There's always functionality around API, lifecycle management, right? I want to create an API, I want to prototype an API, I want to move that API to production, I want to take it back, I want to release a new version. Now all of this does not have to be complicated, right? And as someone said probably, can this be automated? Definitely it can be automated, right? This is a classic example where all of this can be automated, or you probably want a developer or a product manager to handle that, right? So if it's an API that a lot of external developers are using, you typically want a product manager to control and manage the lifecycle of the API, right? And then comes the complexity of authentication, authorization, and key management, right? These are all jargons, right? But typically, if I have to boil down around key things is, I'm a developer. If I'm consuming some other APIs, I should be able to generate tokens and manage it myself, right? So that's another example there. And usage management, right? So if I'm building an API that consumes, let's say for example, Google API, and Google API has got certain threshold limits around which I start paying, I want to see those usage management, right? Now, if I'm an enterprise developer, I am one of those developers of, my dream is to have an airline company. Yeah, I'm lying, but whatever. So what if I wanted to build a reservation API? And if I'm consuming an external feed from Sydney airport about dealing flights, and if there's a cap on it after which they'll start charging me, I want to understand the usage part of it, right? So that's another thing that we need to consider, right? Now, one is that looking at this issue outside the organization, and the second issue is looking at this inside the organization, right? Now, a classic example in here is that my company, which books airline tickets, also has got a Twilio account where you can send SMSs to people who are booking, right? So I want to know that usage within the platform, right? I want to know if the Twilio API introduces latency of 500 milliseconds or 2 seconds, right? So these are the information that are going to be useful for me as a developer, right? And if I make this information available, I don't have to spend hours and hours after building the API on performance testing or performance improvement, right? I can do all of that through abstractions. Okay, yeah, last but not the least is APIs, right? Now, if we are in the business of developing APIs, we are enabling businesses to create those networks, right? I believe that there will be seldom any use cases where you will not touch an external service, right? So if you are writing an API, if you are creating an integration, you're always consuming existing services, right? Now, as I said, right, the previous point that I had was, hey, I want to use a Twilio API. You want me to go to Twilio's developer portal and go through the documentation portal and figure out the sample calls and copy and test it? It could be a better way, right? So if I enable my developers to look up and consume existing APIs in a better way, that will help me fasten the process of development, right? And developer portals, we saw an example of developer portals. I'll not show you today. We'll just go to the next slide. Or maybe there's no next slide, right? Let's put an API. Okay, so assuming that the internet connection is going to work off my phone, we'll build an API and we don't have 30 minutes. Let's see what we can build, okay? So for the sake of discussion, I'm using a tool. Okay, before I talk about the tool, we'll talk about a scenario, right? I told you that my team was in an airline company. So I'm one of the developers of the airline company, and my team has asked me to create an API, right? So the example of we had about the McDonald's, right? The McDonald's created an API. Now my team wants me to create an API which could be used on a web portal, it could be used on a mobile device, or it could be used with Alexa, for example, right? To say, hey, Mr. Fancy flight company, give me options from Melbourne to Sydney. I need to go home tonight. So yeah, that's one. So the reality of life is that this API is not an independent API, right? My team has already created certain APIs around inventory management, flight rates, availability. I have to consume these APIs, right? So that's another important thing. So I'm not creating an API from scratch. I'm reusing these APIs, right? So yeah, my task as a developer is to create a reservation API and then put it into production. Okay, so production means that should be accessible over the web, should be on the internet, and all of the security stuff around it, right? So yeah, that's a high-level diagram, right? My customer will never deliver that. No, I can't deliver that, right? So it's just a picture here. But I can build an API, and we use a tool called, not a tool, I call it as a platform, right? The platform is called Choreo. And I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the platform, because if you are interested in what the platform is, we are right next to the coffee counter, and I can spend the whole day talking about what the platform is. So yeah, these are the APIs that I have. So I've got a booking API that allows me to create and manage bookings. I've got an inventory API that allows me to see how many seats are available for a specific flight, for a specific day. I've got a fares API that tells me what's the price of those APIs. Of course, I've got a manual job called a fare update job, which is like, hey, if my flight seats on specific flights are 60% full, increase the price of the flights. Okay, so that's what happens, you know. Earlier we book, the cheaper flights we get. Okay, yeah, so let's, so slightly inconvenient. Okay, I'm going to sit down, because you need to sit down to develop. Okay, so my favorite thing here is going to be my web browser, which is what I'm going to use to create the API. So I'll go to my developer portal, similar to what Peter had shown us. So my development portal here is called console.choreo.dev. Okay, so I'll give you a quick introduction of what the tool is. So who am I today? I'm a developer, okay? And the idea is I want to show you all of these abstractions that will enable me to develop and deploy APIs faster. Okay, so before I quickly go in, I'll show you probably some details, right? So this is where the my profile is. So it shows me who I am, gives my picture, allows me to configure functionalities, allows me to log in, log out, there's a documentation for the tool available here. I could request for support, through Slack or whatever that is, support portal. There's also developer portal, so all of the APIs that I develop are available on the developer portal as well. So that's a given, right? And this is where the organization and everything comes into play. So this is where I've been configured. So I'm part of an organization called WSO2 SCs. That's where the solution architects belong to, and that's my project, right? So I'll cover my favorite part. Okay, you remember we spoke about the dependencies section. So because I'm a developer, I'm consuming these APIs. What's the best way to handle these dependencies, right? So the approach that WSO2 has taken is we call it as a marketplace, right? Or let's go back, right? Again, one of my favorites is Apple, right? So Apple revolutionized. We heard in the morning today how Apple revolutionized by creating an app store where we bought into the ecosystem. So what we are doing here is simply creating an API store for your organization, right? So I don't want to call up an HR person to figure out what an employee onboarding API is. If I join an organization, I want all of my APIs to be easily accessible, right? So a couple of example here is, you could see here, right? I could have APIs from my company. So these are all the APIs that my team has already created. Okay, it could be my APIs, or it could be APIs from external, right? So it talks about MySQL, Kafka, and others, but it could be this, could be more, right? So that's another way of looking at stuff. Then we spoke about insights as well, right? Who's been consuming my APIs, how often they've been consuming, what's the latency associated. I don't have anything because I haven't deployed any yet, right? So what I'm going to do is pretty much like what Peter showed, right? I'm going to start creating an API. So I'm not going to create something from scratch. I've already created the placeholder. I'm just going to click on it right now to open that API, right? So this is what the thing looks like. So you can see here, right? I don't have to literally log into GitHub or my source code repository to figure out is there any code yet, and it gives me a quick overview of it. Was the last commit done. I just created this bare bones structure at around 9 a.m. this morning. So you see an update 5 hours ago. So let's go and get into the development, right? So the only part that I'm going to tell you about this is that so this language behind this platform is called Ballerina. Okay, it's not a proprietary language. It's a open source language, and I'll just tell you two things. Okay, I want to tell you 6 things, but in the interest of time, just 2 things. Right? One, Ballerina is an integration specific language. What does that mean? Is that it has been a language created specifically for API builders, right? So things like networks, APIs are native constructs, right? Another cool thing that I like about this language is XML and JSON. They are all native data types, right? So think of it that way, right? Java, JavaScript. There's always a handling routine that I have is where I get the API call, I translate it to a string, manipulate a string, and then put it back into JSON, right? That's what I do. But because it's an integration specific language, I don't have to do that. XML and JSON are part of it. And then the second thing I want to tell you is in the least amount of words as possible is what my CPU's words are, right? The source code is the diagram, and the diagram is the source code, right? So with this, although I said no code makes me redundant, it is essential, right? We are all going to be CIOs one day, right? And I hope everyone wants to be one. I want to be one. And then you're going to have skill shortages, right? You'll always have developers like me quitting. If my developer quits, I want to have someone on board. More than that, I want to have a process experts review the flow. I'm not saying developers don't understand the requirement. I'm saying that how can we involve them as well, right? So having this diagram in there, process experts they don't get turned off when you look at 100 lines of code, right? So they can see that and say, oh yeah, you know what? There's something wrong in here. When you have that condition in there, it should not return. It should check for something else. So things like those, right? So the logic becomes very clear, and you got a chance to involve them into the process as well, right? So, and then also it's not about just them. If Puneet joins the team yesterday, and he have to make any changes, it's easier for me to understand this, right? So yeah, let's get into the code. So with the magic that we have with Ballerina is that you don't have to worry about should I do a code or should I do a diagram, right? And both of it is, now again, the magic here is that because it's not Java, or it's not Python, or it's not Go, there's a full synchronicity between the diagram version of it and source code version of it as well. So let's say if Robin hates diagrams, he wants to use code only, he can write it in code, I can edit it in diagram, and then it will not fall back, right? So what you're seeing here is going to be Visual Studio. It's loading the web version of Visual Studio, and this might take a while. So while it's doing that, any quick questions? No? We'll take questions in the end as well. Okay, so this is loaded, right? So, okay, so let's get back to work. Not fully loaded yet. So what I'm going to do is, so this is where it is, right? So it's giving me all the experience of doing that. It already has got the greeting API. I don't need one. So I'm going to delete that, right? Okay, whatever, I accept. Don't tell me again. Okay, so first what I want to do is, there's another concept called API-led integration, right? Which means that if I'm looking at building a reservations API, I need to figure out what the input of the API is going to be, right? It's a jargon and an approach, right? So I'm going to say, okay, you know what? Let's define the input payload for my API. So I'm going to say, go here, and the input payload is called record in the ballerina world, right? And then I'm going to say, hey, I want a reservation. Okay, I'm bad with spellings, and especially when someone is watching, I always make mistakes. So reservation, okay, that's my record name, right? The type. Okay, and then it's all about writing those fields, right? So the format is pretty straightforward. It's string, and what does a flight reservation have, right? Origin. And then if there is origin, there has to be string destination as well. Okay, and if there's we varied the origin destination, what else do we have, right? Like a flight number, of course. Like, there can't be anything without flight number. String, I'll say flight number. And then, of course, there has to be flight date. I'm going to say string, flight date, and then, of course, not string, but I want the number of seats. So I'm going to say integer, and I will say seats. And what I'll do is, if we have time, I will also send the person who requests a booking, an SMS using Twilio, right? Because I want to show you I can interact with external APIs too. But if not, I'll still have a placeholder here for a contact number. So I'll still put it string, not sting, string. Okay, and contact number. So yeah, I try to stick to camel case wherever I can. Okay, so I think I'm pretty much done, right? It covers most of the information that I need for my payload, so I'm happy here. So I'm just going to say save. So I've got a record definition in here. Now let's have a look at the construct I have here, right? So I'll edit this, and here it's asking me, hey, what does the URL path look like, right? So I'm going to say flight/reserve, okay? And yep, everything else looks all right. It's going to be on port 9090, but hey, if I'm going to expose an API, it will not be 9090. It has to be on port 443. Okay, so I've defined the structure of the URL. Now what I want to do is just have to define the API, right? So now all of this, of course, you can automate it. You can have an import of a Swagger API, but if I had to import it, it wouldn't be that fun. So I'm just clicking through it, showing you all the options. Okay, so the reservation API I want has to be a post, right? Because has to be a post. It can't be get, right? So this post, yeah. Okay, and then it's asking me what's a resource path, and I'm just going to say reserve flight. Okay, now all I have to do is two things, right? One, I have to say that, hey, Mr. API, don't process the API unless you get the right payload, right? So validation at the source, and it's asking me what should I return, right? So what I'm going to do is, just to make things more fancy, I'm going to return the reservation record, the one that I'm receiving. I'm going to pass it back, and I'll configure the input payload, right? Which is going to be the request of the API, the one that we've already defined for reservation. So I'm going to say add payload, and it should give me a dialog. And I will say, okay, yep, the type is, you remember the reservation record we created? Yep, so it's prompting me. So the AI is working, and the name of the variable is going to be reservation with a small r. No, it changed it, so I don't like that. I'm going to make it lowercase again, okay? I don't have a default value, so I'm happy with what it is, so that's what it is, okay? And now what I want to do is my return type is going to be reservation as well, so reservation. So it could be reservation or an error, right? So to complicate things, to confuse you guys, there's a question mark in there. It just means that it's an optional variable, right? So maybe it's available, there's a value, or maybe there's not a value, right? So yeah, let's get started, right? So save. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is, as a good developer, I have to log everything. So, but I don't want to have the complexity of observability, right? So I just want to log the flight number, right? So I know something is happening. So I'm just going to click here and say, I want a function call. Now, this is because I don't understand the syntax for Ballerina, right? If I was a pro developer, I would directly go back to the code and write everything. So I'm going to search for what's available for logging. Okay, there's a module log, good. And there's a log print info. Yep, that works for me. And it's giving me the format. And what I want to do is write the message, right? Received request for flight, and then have the concat notation, and then how do I reference the flight number object of my reservation object, right? So all I have to do is say reservation with the lowercase r, because that's the name of my variable, dot flight number. Okay, it's complaining, but I think it has validated my syntax. And yeah, looks okay. Let's save it. Okay. I could show you. So while I'm doing all of this, there's already a code being generated, right? I'll quickly show you a glimpse of it so that you can understand, right? So you see everything that I've done visually. Everything has got a code here, and I can modify something in here, and then it will reflect, for, or let's say I wanted to say request received with flight number, which is incorrect, but who cares? Right, so it's all in sync, right? I don't have to worry about going back and forth. Now, what I want to do is I want to call one of the APIs that my developers has already created, right? So you have a look at the way I'm doing this, okay? So we've created an abstraction for an API that's already inside my organization, and the abstraction here is called connector, okay? Let's look at the connector. Now, these are all the connectors available. Now, these are not only inside my organization, but external to my organization as well. So if I was interacting with Stripe for payments, Twitter, or World Bank, I would do that. But I just want to use something that my dev team has created. So I'm going to say WSO2SA. And once I do that, it gives me the booking API. Okay? So I hope you appreciate the easiness it creates, right? So here it is. I did not have to go through a Swagger. I did not configure the URL because these connectors were already inbuilt. Now, what magic is this connectors, right? Connectors is nothing but OpenAPI specification, which we've ingested into the platform already. Okay. So doing that, putting it inside the platform, we convert that OpenAPI specifications into a connector, and the connector now helps me figure out whatever the minimum mandatory fields are, and you'll see how will I interact with it, right? So what I want to do is, this API requires authentication, right? So I was talking so much about security, now I cannot write the secrets directly into the code, right? So what I'm going to do is, like my colleague Robin, who likes to write the values inside the code, I'm not going to write it, right? I'm going to just click on something which we call as add configuration. And here I can define that. So I'm going to say bookings client ID. And then I'm going to say another configuration. And I'm going to say this time it's going to be bookings client secret. Okay, done. So now that I've added the code to call, I made a mistake somewhere. Yeah, probably, okay, what I'm going to do is quickly, this is what happens when you do a demo, you miss something. So what I'm going to do is quickly redo it. Okay, so I'm going to select this, say I want to add a connector. looking for the right bookings API. Okay, and then configuring configurations for the components. And I'm going to say bookings client ID. Yep, that looks good. And then I have to do the same thing for the secret. So it's, in a way, what I'm doing here is I'm just telling the system that, hey, you know what? I'll give you values for this. I don't want to I will inject these values during the deployment, okay? And the deployment is going to be on fancy Kubernetes. Okay, no worries, going to verify my spellings. Okay, so I'm hoping, okay, yep, it has worked. Now what I want to do is just call the post action, right? So here's how I browse what is the capability of the API, right? So when I click on this API actions, it's actually going through the methods of that API to see what capability, and you can see those names, right? The post API, mouse is moving, get bookings, and the post change status, right? So all I have to do as a developer is not worry about going through documentation. So this gives me an ease that, you know, I don't have to go and read the documentation, I just have to pick the right function. And then it'll tell me what are the mandatory fields, and I just have to substitute those values, right? So I'm going to select post bookings, and it's actually parsing through the Open API specifications, and it is generating this payload, right? So it's a body payload, a request payload, which is already from the Swagger definition. And now I just have to map my object into it, right? So I'm going to say reservation, or, you know, I'm too lazy to type, and I make a lot of spelling mistakes. So what I'm going to do is go to suggestions, and suggestions has got reservation as an object, and let's see what else it has got, right? So I'm looking at flight number. So I've got a flight number, so I can just select this, so I can avoid typing, because it's I make a lot of spelling mistakes. So I'm just going to go to suggestions. It's got this AI built in where it's providing me the other recommendations. I'm again going back to the reservation object, and I'm going to choose a field origin. Okay, so now I will choose the destination field. So all I have to do is figure out where I want to pre-fill. Go to reservation. Now reservation is a big object, and then the destination. Okay, so it's filling up all of those for me. And now I'll go to the flight date. So again, same thing, just clicking through the reservation and then the flight date. Okay, and then now I'm just going to select this seats, and let's go to seats. Reservation as an object, go back to suggestions, and then yeah, it sorts as well, right, based on what it thinks. So I think I'm done with the mapping, right? This was very arduous, so let's save it. And I'll show you a couple of things, right? The best part of it is this thing, right? It's already based on the APIs I've been consuming. It's already telling me the forecasted performance for a single user latency is 1.9 seconds, and throughput per second is 0.5 requests per second. Right? So I haven't even deployed anything. It's telling me, so it's good stuff, right? So yeah. So all of this, what this is that, you know, the platform knows what's the latency for this, because the platform has already consumed these APIs. It already knows, that every set that I'm introducing, how does it impact the performance, right? So it's basically making my task easier, right? Now I know that, holy shit, it's not acceptable, right? I cannot have a 2-second latency, right? So I know I can start performing streaming only while I'm developing, right? So, but I'm going to leave it here. This is a very good API. Let's assume that this is a production grade API. Let's move to the deployment. Oh, I forgot the most important thing. Did you see here? I haven't returned anything. So yeah, let's go and figure out how do I return things, right? Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do is switch to the code view to show you that I can also write code. I know a few statements. I'm not that old. So return. And I'm going to return the reservation object. Okay, it's prompting me, that's good, and a semicolon to end. Okay, that's it. Okay, oh, what is this? Okay, everything else looks okay to me. So we're just going to close it because I don't like looking at the code. So my throughput has changed. No, it didn't change. So it is just, I can see there's a return in here. So I'm good. So all I have to do is, like a good developer, I have to commit my changes. Oops. So I'm going to write a statement saying, hey, this is an initial functionality. Every good developer writes a comment, and it's telling me, hey, do you want to commit? Yeah, of course I want to commit. And then once the commit is done, I'm going to push the source code to the repository, right? So it'll, yeah. Okay, it's saying that there's an error. So yeah, something quite didn't work out. Let's have a quick look. So I've got client secret, and okay, so I've got a duplicate configuration. So I hope that is the only error, and commit. Okay, it's taking a bit of a while, but yeah. Do we have any questions? I'll try to answer questions and let it do its job as well. Looks like it is done. I just want to push now. Ask me later. Okay, so seems like it is all there now, right? So the only way for me to confirm this is just go to my API, and what I'm expecting to see here is that all of these fancy abstractions for the API and all, I should see the same diagram again here. Yep, it says accommodate something 57 seconds ago. Yep, that looks all right. So looks like I'm ready to go to the staging. So I'm just going to go to the deployment tab. Now is the magic required for those for the pipelines, right? This is where our DevOps team is going to come. So what has happened here is I've already have default pipelines being created, and I've already extracted the booking ID and everything here, right? So I'm copying the client ID. Copying the client secret. Yeah, and I don't know what this conf is, but I'll
I think
leave
that
it.
conf is used as the secret.
Yeah, it was a.
But yeah, that's the one assigned to the secret, so I think you should paste the secret in there.
Secret? Ah, damn it, it's going to fail now.
Yeah.
But okay, let's see. Let's create an error. It's a good observation. Right, so this is going to take a while, but we'll open up. So what it's doing actually is compiling and running the build, and you'll see all that in detail, right? So it's already persisted. With all the abstractions, it'll take a while. Yeah. So any questions that I can answer while it's doing that? It'll take 4 or 5 seconds off. So what I'll do is I'll show you the version that I tried this morning, and that was is it a Thursday?
Can
No.
we look at that error log at least to see what it says?
We could, yeah, we could. Let's have a look. So this is a deployment log, and sorry. So I guess when I switched to the code view and my cursor was at not a right position and I pressed enter, and that is where the issue would have happened. So this is where the build logs are, and there's an error. So it looks like there's a redeclared symbol bookings ID. So yeah, so what I have to do is just go back and change that. So I'll just go there and it's in here, and let's go and review that thing again. So we'll fix the conf as well, right? So okay, and what else? So yeah, you're right. I just have to copy the configuration variable here, and that should get it working. Yeah, so now there's a warning saying that I'm not using the output of this API call, but yeah, I'm just going to say fixed the error. Yeah, so this might take a while, but I'll quickly get on to another component and show you something else. So let's look at the Wednesday API. Okay, and let's look at the deploy part of it. So this is the pipeline component that I was trying to show you, right? Where you can have a configure and deploy, and at the config time, it will ask me to put in the values for those configuration variables. And yep, this is where it's saying there are 2 configurations, and then all I can do is click on the test. It takes me to the test screen, and similar as what we saw in Peter's session, I can go try it out. Now I'm too lazy to type the whole payload, so I've copied a version of it here. Okay, it's got the right values from Sydney to Melbourne, and I'm going to execute. So when you see, it will also give me a curl statement. Yep, that's a curl statement. In case if I wanted to try it from a command line, and that's the response. Okay, so this is what the real server response has been, and that's my number. So yep, everything has worked well. And then comes the part of the life cycle that you want to maintain, right? You want to now that I've tested this API, I want to make it available to the external world, right? So this is where I would. So currently it's got the lifecycle status of created, it's got 0 consumers, it also has the security predefined, right? So as I said, right, as an organization, I want to define the security and governance strategies just once, and every API that I create should have that. So as you would have noticed, I did not have to write any logic around security and authentication, right? And of course, there are plans, right? So if you want to sell this API, you want to have monetization plans, you want to select plans where Puneet can use this API 5 times a second. If it goes more than five times a second, you block him, right? Or you can have him buy a next level of the plan, right? So you can have those monetary values and say you'll have a basic bronze, silver plan, right? And then comes the observability, right? I don't want to worry about the logging and the stuff, right? And this should be a good example for that, right? So I did write logs around things for logging it. Oh, there's a lot of errors. But yeah, here's the quick graph. So we just made one API call, so that API call shows up here. There's a diagnostic view as well. You know, if I wanted to see what's error size and stuff, and yeah, it looks like there's a new feature showing the other parts of it, right? So it's showing me what calls are taking the maximum amount of time. I also want to have a look at the logs, right? There was a lot of errors. Let's have a look at that. So yeah, this is where the logs are, and you know, it says received request for the flight. Yeah, it's showing the module numbers. There's something definitely I've mismatched. But yeah, that was in a quick session showing you how to develop APIs faster, right? So the magic here was that you enable the developer with abstractions. You know, give him the task that he doesn't need to worry about. Okay, so things like authentication, consuming internal APIs, pipelines, observability, the deployment, all of that takes time. And if you remove that time from the developer's time, he can deliver APIs in days. And again, yeah, let me please make this clear, right? It's not about coding over here. Okay, so this, what I showed you, is a pretty generic diagram. You can implement it with any technology that you're using. You have the option of building everything yourself, or if you would like to have something out of the box, this is the platform that comes out of the box.
Okay. Do you have an example of like quite a complex code and how it goes from code to diagram? Like, does it always present as being easy to consume, or if you're in a complex code state, what does your diagram look like?
Yeah, so it usually depends on the, so the question was, do I have an example? No, I don't have an example currently, but think of it as the more number of lines we have is the longer the diagram is going to be. And the more logical transformations we have, so it's if another state where you will see those channeling, right? Now, because all of this is so native and built into the programming platform, at least I'm not involved in any use case where it breaks. Everything, as long as your code is syntactically correct, you will always have a diagram supporting it, and the other way around.
Okay, so that's an interesting point. If your code is not correct by syntax, will your diagram also be wrong? I mean, even if it doesn't work,
Yeah,
the diagram will construct.
So for example, in the when I was showing you my example, there was a time when let me show you that part, right? So if I go back to the develop tab here, and I made an error in configuring one of the values when I was calling this API. So what happened was, when I switched with that incorrect code, what it did was it did not show me this arrow. So it showed me that there is a statement in here for new, but it was not able to point that new to the real connector that I was using. Okay, so that was an indication for me to see, hey, you know what? I was expecting it to call an external API, but it didn't.
Yeah.
That was due to an error.
Yeah.
Okay, now I could have fixed that error by clicking here and then clicking on the green delete button, or going back to the code and cleaning the code there.
Cool.
Yeah. But one of the design principles of this language was consistency between the diagram and the code. Okay. So you could see this as a low code editor as well, but frankly, you know, even though it's no code, you still, as Mary mentioned in the morning, right, you still need to be technically aware of things, right? And this is what no code, I believe we are not really at a stage where a citizen developer can go and start coding it. Like, think of it as, hey, I'm a process expert. I don't understand anything about REST APIs. I don't think I can build an API completely right now. But if I know technical, my concepts are very clear. I don't know coding, but I still understand the concept of REST APIs, secret management. I can build one using this. Or I'm a full stack developer. I can build one faster using the diagrams. And the code as well, yeah.
So, thank you very much.
There was a latency for 2 seconds just for this minimum part.
Yeah.
Let's say if you're looking into a complex scenario
Yes.
where latency increases, does this platform or no-code platforms gives us the ability to control that latency?
Now the latency is a function of the dependencies. Yeah. Okay. So for example, let's say if we reach a situation where the functionality that I'm building has got 5 seconds latency, which is not acceptable.
Yeah.
Okay. Then after running a couple of calls, it will also show me. Let's try and see if I can get that view right now. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm just going back to observe part of it, and then it will tell me if the latency for my API is 5 seconds. It will tell me which API contributes the most. So which means that if I have 3 APIs and one of the API takes 3 seconds, which adds to 5 seconds in my API, it will tell me what the API is. And then my job is to go and ask my team member to fix that API. Right? So let's see if I can open that view, right? So I've enabled a demo part of it for the complex API. So let's see if I can try the sample service. So yeah, I want to show you what I mean. So because my logic is very simple, I cannot show you that. And this one is a sample observability report, which should show me that. If it loads. But yeah, do you agree with that view?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, this is an example that you would want as well. This is a complex example, right? It's a complex thing, yeah. So yeah, this is how it shows, and yeah, so it still doesn't show me that latency based view. Hmm. Yeah, so what I was looking at, it is here, it is right, latency, and it is showing me for the first part of the, yeah. So this is so if I have multiple invocations of the API, here's where it is going to show me all the latency calls, and I can look at the one that has got the, let's see if there's one that is smallest or the longest, right? Yeah, they all are pretty fast. So yeah, if I look at here, so you can see here this section took around 2 microseconds, and then yeah, it also shows that this condition was true, so it went through this part, and there should be another latency figure that I'm looking at, right? So yeah, it's just that this is a slightly inconvenient way to use the mouse here, but yeah, but as you can see here, right? So this all is adding up somewhere. So you know what part of the code is creating the issue, right? And that's the difference between if you would have heard our CEO talking yesterday, domain specific language will not give you visibility at this level, right? So if you're using something where it abstracts you, and if you want to, let's say, this part is taking long, and let's say respond is something that it returns the value, right? But let's say if you want to use a different mechanism to return the value, which is slightly more latency, we call that control to optimize it here. As it had been a domain specific language, you pretty much have to live in the stuff that you already have, right? If it's not optimized the platform, then you won't be able to optimize it, but this gives you an option